Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very senior corporate professional turned social entrepreneur, Mr. Stefaan Van Hooydonk from Belgium. Stefaan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashutosh. Super to be there.
Thank you. Stefaan is the founder of the Global Curiosity Institute. He's also the co-founder and dean of the Earth Academy. He's worked with Cognizant, Flipkart, Philips, Nokia, and Agfa. And he's an author. He's an author of a book titled The Curiosity Manifesto. So, Stefaan, let's start talking about the Global Curiosity Institute. I mean, when I read about you, I was certainly curious about what the Curiosity Institute does.
Well, it's actually a very personal story. I was chief learning officer of many organizations, and my last was Cognizant, 300,000 people, and you have to make sure they grow and develop all the time. And I realized that there's a number of people in organizations who are all the time asking questions. They're all the time reading books, all the time are looking at podcasts like this. And these people, they're naturally hungry and they're humble. They don't claim to know everything because they're all the time, their sponge is becoming bigger and bigger. And I realized after a while that a number of things. First of all, that these is not everybody's like that. There's a number of people, and I ended up calling these people A players. And then there's a number of E players, people that need something to get moving. And I also realized that not all organizations or not all environments are supporting this, because these people are part of systems, and if the system is supporting them, then I started reading on them on this notion, and I realized in the end that curiosity was the big differentiator. Of whether you have it or you don't have it. And then I realized basically it's not that some people are born with curiosity. Part of it is that you're born with, but part is something that comes along the way, something like a muscle, something that can grow or that can. So I started it was 18 months ago now to set up the Global Curiosity Institute, and my focus is initially to focus on businesses, especially now I think the notion of curiosity is hot. And also many leaders are starting to realize that the answers and the questions to those that we have now or the questions that we had say 30 years ago are very different questions that we're having now. Look at COVID.
Correct.
Industries change dramatically, and suddenly the processes, the culture, the practices that we have in your organizations, the way we're doing strategy is not the one that we should have. So, and then after I want to get started with businesses, I want to focus on society really. How do you bring up children in a curious fashion? What's the role of teachers, and how can teachers become more curious themselves so that they empower their students more? And unemployed people, how to be curious and prepare yourself for the next job type of things, So I think it's a great new skill in the 21st century.
Fantastic. So, Stefaan, based on your previous experience where you said you worked with 300,000 employees, what were your observations between the growth chart of a curious employee and a not so curious employee?
A growth chart, are you talking about the behavior or the
professional growth, behavior patterns?
Okay, if you're talking about literal growth, what I've and the lucky I've been doing some research in the last 18 months and even before that, curious people, they make more money and make faster careers than their incurious peers. So the more that people open up themselves to opportunities, to learning, to this natural humility of not knowing or telling yourself I don't know, but having that discipline and that intentionality to go after that knowledge and still find out and not say I don't know and I'll leave and I'm going to focus on something else. These people are are just more successful. And I've also found now that companies that are curious, because not only individuals can be curious, teams can be curious, and organizations can be curious. Um, Organizations that embrace curiosity in their culture, in their values, in their processes, they're just more successful.
Very interesting. So, you know, when I was reading about you, I came across a term which is the curiosity muscle. You know, and we've often talk about it in sports that you've got to have muscle memory. So I was fascinated by this phrase, curiosity muscle. I'd love to understand what you mean by it and how do we develop this muscle?
Well, I think I mentioned already a little bit early in the podcast. Curiosity, as we have found, is both nature and nurture. And actually, very interesting. It's what kind of psychologists have found this in comparing twins, especially twins that were brought up in different families, and then kind of finding out what is the nature part and what is the nurture part, and how does it influence people's behavior and things like that. So, what these bright people have found out is that it's about 50%. 50% is innate, and you can't change, and that's just who you are into your intellectual powers and stuff. And then the other 50% is what people call state curiosity, is what changes all the time in your interaction with your environment when you're young, with your parents, with society, but also later on with your peers and with companies. And the beauty with that state is that it can change. So 50% of your curiosity, actually any mindset, can grow if you're intentional about it. But it also means that it can be taken away from you. Right. If you're not really focused on this. And that's why often people we tell ourselves, or as we're kids, we're curious, and then it goes downhill from there. But it's not entirely true, because people can really refound beautifully their curiosity muscle. So for me, that part of that 50% is malleable. Something that you can focus on, that something with the right intentionality, with the right focus, with the right humility, and with the right intent, you can do magic with.
So my question to you, from an organizational perspective, is what is the difference between curiosity and being nosy or invading your privacy?
It's a beautiful question, and actually, curiosity is one word that encompasses many different terms. On the scale of the negative, indeed, nosiness, gossip, all the way to the positive. And actually, as of late, it is curiosity is more on the positive side than on the negative side. Before the 1950s, or around the 1950s, curiosity was linked to nosy children and focusing on the things that you were not supposed to know. So prying into people's business. And I think that's fascinating, because our language is really influencing how we think about the world. We don't realize that, but words actually shape our thoughts. And then often we are still referring to that, you could say, old notion of curiosity, which is more than the negative, the fleeting knowledge, the gossiping, while at the same time we're embracing also the positive side of curiosity. Interestingly, often when we're thinking of ourselves, we think of ourselves in a positive light. I am curious and I'm looking at the world, and I'm inquisitive. But if you're looking, especially people in power, if they're looking at their teams and they're not really willing to let curiosity happening, they're often thinking of others as, oh, I shouldn't be letting curiosity in the team, because it might lead to inefficiencies. The people might kind of be doing the wrong things. That's why you see often in organizations also, especially the more traditionalist organizations, that curious people are thought to be difficult to manage.
Correct.
And it is really the curious leaders, really, who are capable of tapping into that knowledge. Nowadays, in high knowledge-based organizations, and I've been talking a lot to people because of my book. It's not really possible anymore to think of people as just cogs in a system. We need to allow them to have ideas of their own, to challenge the status quo, etc. Now, one extra point which is quite interesting about the journey of curiosity through the ages, because when you're looking at least the Western society, when you're looking at the old Greek environment, the old philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they were thinking about curiosity as a positive thing, like knowledge for knowledge's sake, and finding out things. And then when we're entering in the Middle Ages in the Western world, curiosity suddenly was on a negative side.
Correct.
Because the opposite of curiosity was devotion. And curiosity was distracting people from focusing on God. And then in the 17th, 18th century, suddenly there was the opposite of curiosity was science. Because because in those days, strangely, they thought that women were focused on curiosity. They were curious about their looks, about fleeting knowledge, about temporary knowledge. While the real men, not all men, but the real men, they were focused on science, which was the realm of universal knowledge. And nowadays we still have this distinction between curiosity on a negative side and on a positive side. Nowadays, in a lot of children books, we're still a little bit dubious about how we present curiosity. You know, Curious George, which especially in Anglo-Saxon countries is this little monkey, always gets into trouble. So curiosity, from a very early age onwards, we're telling kids, don't be curious. Just listen to daddy, listen to mommy, and don't venture out. And Curious George always has this parent or this kind of master who is saving him from troubles. Or Curiosity Killed the Cat, which is another kind of remnant of the past. Actually, Curiosity Killed the Cat in the 17th century was a different verb, was a different saying, was care killed the cat.
Okay.
As in worry. And only in the 19th century, there was a shift towards curiosity.
Wow.
As society, as the environment was pushing for more obedience. And so it's quite
fascinating. It's very interesting you're talking about religion, because even in the Hindu scriptures, which go back 5,000-7,000 years, there is a lot of talk on curiosity and how important it is to be curious. And it's also, well established that closed canons in religion inhibit curiosity. Open canons permit curiosity. So that's a very interesting example you gave me. Thank you. So, let me then come straight to your book, because I think you've covered a lot of ground in your book, the Curiosity Manifesto. Before I ask you about the book, is this available on Amazon and other platforms?
It will be available in May on pretty much all platforms, in audiobook, in paperback for starters, and then later on I'm doing an audiobook and a hardcover.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the hypothesis for your book.
Well, there's two hypotheses, and I already talked about one. First of all, curiosity is both state and trade. So how can we deal with that? If 50% is malleable, how can we deal with that? And another hypothesis for me is very important. In times of crisis, like we're now, or in times of dynamic times, we need curiosity much more than in times of stability.
Correct.
Now, we're coming out of a 20th century, which was by and large a pretty stable place, a stable century. And we're now in the 21st century, and COVID came, and all these changes are happening in our industries and in global environment, and climate change, and in Brexit, and the United States suddenly closing its border for visas, and all these new things are happening to us now. And all these dynamic times, they're asking for much more ideas, much more openness. If you're seeing that Marriott They have now close to 700,000 beds. It took them 88 years to create those. And Airbnb took about 4 years.
Correct.
And Airbnb is twice the market capitalization of Marriott. You know, the 21st century for me is the century of ideas. The 20th century was the century of conglomerates or big companies. And that means that we're starting a completely new paradigm of how to be as individuals, or how to be as companies. And for me, that requires, or the hypothesis is that let's change the way we're looking at things. And yeah, I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So what else do you cover in the book? Do you talk of leadership as well? Because my question to you is, how do you determine or identify a curious leader, and what are her or his advantages?
No, it's beautiful. Maybe if you ask me two questions. First of all, quickly about the book, I do cover about both the curiosity at the level of individuals, teams and organizations, and leaders is on the fourth pillar. And I describe a bit the psychology, the benefits, kind of what the difference between narrow and broad curiosity. And also probably an important one for me, I differentiate between three types of curiosity. Curiosity about the world, which is typically what we think of curiosity, like the Einstein, the science type of inquisitive nature. But I also have added two dimensions: curiosity of others. I call it empathic curiosity. How interested am I in the people I live with, the people I work with, my team? And then a third one, probably most difficult one, and you might like that because I think the Indian tradition has influenced me quite a bit on that, is interest in myself. And how curious am I in going deep into my roots, into my soul, into my values, into my limiting beliefs, etc. And yeah, I tried to describe that in the book, and also how HR and the innovation team and strategy can all work much better with that, also learning and development. In terms of leaders, I think what I found with many leaders is that curiosity doesn't have to be this extroverted thing. Some people can be very extroverted and be curious, but also very many people are introverted and very curious nonetheless. So, but there's a high level of intentionality and of awareness of those leaders, I found. And what I see with curious leaders is I notice a level of what I call confident humility. It's people that are okay to say that they don't know. And actually they're proud to say that they don't know, because they realize that they're humans, and because of saying no, they're inviting the team to chip in, and they're not the oracles that are always opening their mouth when they're asked the questions type of a thing. No, because that's a challenge of a leader. Often they're paid to have the answers, and the higher up people get into the hierarchies, the more they think they need to have an answer, and if they don't have the answer, they feel as if they're not worth their money, or so that humility is a really important one, I think, and allowing others. And what I've also noticed with leaders is that leaders know when to allow for curiosity or exploration, and they know when to allow for exploitation or action. Because nowadays we're so much into action modus, come into projects and we don't make plans anymore. We just get into the action immediately.
Yes.
While asking some basic questions in the beginning: what shall we do? How should we do it? What's the best way? Inviting the team actually has proven that it reduces groupthink. It makes the team more successful. It delivers things faster, etc., etc. So it's so that's a bit about the leader. Maybe the last point, I'm trying to do a lot of research, because curiosity for me is also data driven. When I did some research amongst leaders and the learning behavior, because we know that learning and curiosity links together. Correct. When people are interested in something, then their mind opens up to faster, deeper learning, better memory, etc. So I've looked at leadership profiles and I checked, is there an influence on the leader learning behavior onto the team, yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at many leaders and I actually found that if the leader learns a lot, actually the team will also learn a lot. And that's great. Because a person might, when I'm talking about learning, it's not going to classes. It might be reading articles, reading books, looking at videos, looking at podcasts, and probably talking to the team about this. I've heard this new idea, and what do you think? But the opposite of this research is sadly also true. If the learner is not focused on learning for her or himself, then the team also doesn't learn.
Well said.
And I'm noticing in the talent management practices in many organizations, don't really dive in enough into the data around those managers and then try to help them towards becoming more learning or make them aware that actually their influence and the shadow that they cast can be both very positive and but also negative.
Wow. So my next question to you, Stefaan, is about culture. And you worked with several multinational corporations. I'd love to get your perspective on what is the impact culture has on curiosity. Some countries, some people just don't want to talk, or they can't be curious because their religion or culture doesn't allow them to be.
Well, it's a beautiful question. Let me start. When I'm thinking about culture, I always refer to the big culture guru, which is Geert Hofstede. Hofstede, and he's a Dutch person, and he's done a lot of research back in IBM with curiosity, and he defines cultures of countries. Now we're realizing in the meantime that the country of a culture, the culture of a country is not superseding everything else.
Correct.
Because that would mean that every single individual in the country, every family, every company would behave exactly in the same way. And we realize the world is more complex than that.
Right.
So there's also something like a company culture. When I worked for Flipkart in Bangalore, or when I worked for Philips in Holland, or for Cognizant in the UK, every country has very different, and every company is recruiting different types of people that are attracted to that company. So, having said that, in some cultures, like you're talking about, if you're looking at the Western culture, which is more individualistic in nature, their curiosity is more a function of the individual. In more collectivist societies, like talk about the Middle East and going east, and not every country is the same, but in kind of making back. So the curiosity is more at the level of the collective, of the family. So yet there is also very curious individuals. And also those countries or cultures which are high on from a political or a religious perspective, there also are more requiring people to be conformist than curious. People in North Korea, I don't think that they want people to be very curious, because typically what you have with heavy influencing religions or governments, they want people to be obedient, and not to be so. And that has nothing to do with the national culture. That just has to do with what type of a system do you try to employ in a society. And it's a multifaceted question that you see. I found, for instance, and since there's quite a number of listeners from India, that my data, I've got two diagnostics. One diagnostic is focusing on the individual curiosity, and I check people's about their empathic, their intellectual, and their self-reflective curiosity. And then I found specifically in India, and I'd be interested to hear your and maybe other people's, when people age, there's a difference between men and women in their curiosity profiles. Men's curiosity profiles become higher as they age, With women, it's the other way around. I've not found it anywhere else in the world.
Wow. Okay.
And how people have been explaining, my Indian friends have been explaining this to me, what it has to do with me time, is that society has more as a bigger requests on women than they have on men as they get older. And men have more me time. They can be more out in society, and maybe also has to do with work ethics. Like, but it's interesting dynamics that you find in every country.
I'm sure there must be answers, but I need to research this, and I'll come back to you on this one. But Stefaan, on that note, I think we're now running out of time. So I really want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me on curiosity. I had never ever imagined I could have a 26-minute conversation on curiosity. But you obviously have so much learning about curiosity, and thank you for sharing such a basic philosophy, which is the more curious you are, the more you're likely to succeed in your career, more likely you're to succeed in your own life. Thank you again for talking to me about your book. I will look out for your book, The Curiosity Manifesto, when it's released in May. And I urge all our viewers and listeners to also have a look at The Curiosity Manifesto and then take a decision. But thank you again, Stefaan, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Astrid. It was lovely to be with you. Great stuff.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.